plants are trying to kill you. As little as 5 kidney beans have been known to put people in the hospital, as reported by the WHO or the Agricultural Revolution. Our brains were 11% larger than they are now. The plant makes 10,000 times more pesticides and insecticides by weight than the pesticides that we spray on them industrially. Fructose has been shown to break down into the same byproducts as alcohol. So you get the same damage to your body from fructose as you do from alcohol. If you eat more saturated fat, you're protected against strokes. You have less strokes.
MD and a nutritional researcher educating the world about the optimal nutrition for human health and performance with a species-specific diet. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who's going to be talking to us about the carnivore nutrition and dropping some truth bombs about plants that would probably shock you. So welcome, Dr. Anthony, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your carnivore lifestyle choice, and were you always into this, or what was it specifically that nudged you to making this shift?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you, and thank you for having me on. Well, I believe exactly as you say that this is our optimal human diet for health and performance. And if you look at animals in the wild, they eat very, very specific diets. They don't eat a wide variety of different things, especially if we're talking about eating plants. And so animals that eat plants, they eat very specific plants. We eat a very, very wide variety of plants, and that's very abnormal. That's not something we see in nature. So if you look at biology, if you look at our biology, and our history and anthropology and previous civilizations and even current civilizations and the different ways that they've eaten, the ones that have been successful and most successful, the ones that have eaten predominantly meat, those are what prehistorically people would have eaten before the agricultural revolution, would have just been largely meat. During the ice ages, it would probably have been exclusively meat because there really weren't any other options. If you're up in the ice flows, there isn't anything, you're not growing crops, certainly, and you're not going to have a lot of forage. So what you're eating is animals. You're eating other animals and you're hunting, and that's what we were. We have been apex predators since the dawn of humanity. And so looking at that from that perspective, things make a lot more sense, because if you have an animal and you feed it something that it doesn't evolve on, or that's something that didn't eat in nature, it can get very, very sick. And this is why there are signs at zoos and at parks that say don't feed the animals. It makes them very sick. And we know this. We know this very, very well, that when you feed these animals these opposing foods, that they get very, very sick. Well, what do they get sick with? They get obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, arthritis, all the same things we get. And in fact, zookeepers will tell you that if you feed animals human food, they get human diseases, right? Mm-hmm. But, these are non-communicable. They're not, because they're eating popcorn, they're not catching Crohn's disease from someone. They're developing Crohn's disease because of the popcorn, and someone else, probably the same thing. So these foods are causing these diseases, as they do throughout the rest of the animal kingdom. How I came to this was about 23 years ago, when I was taking cancer biology in my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington in Seattle. And we learned, of this nature, that, you had to eat very specific plants if you're going to eat any plants, right? Mm-hmm. People know this intuitively. If you get lost in the woods, you can't just eat any random plant. Most of them will make you very, very sick or even kill you. You have to know exactly which plants are safe to eat. But that safety doesn't mean that there are no harmful things in them. It just means that we have better ability, more of an ability to break down those harmful chemicals than we do for, say, hemlock or something like that, right? Yeah. So that's but that doesn't mean that it's good for us. It just means that it's less bad for us, and so we can survive on it, which is great. That's a benefit to us if we need it to survive. But that doesn't mean that that's the best thing that we can eat. It doesn't mean that that's going to be optimal for us. So we were learning this from a cancer perspective. So we were looking at carcinogens, and we learned 23 years ago that there were 136 known human carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts alone, and that there were over 100 in mushrooms, and over 60, over 80 in spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, every single plant that you've ever eaten and find in the grocery store. They all had dozens of known human carcinogens. This is a well-documented fact, even documented and discussed by the WHO. They have a whole website dedicated to the natural toxins in foods, uh, all plant foods. They say foods, but every single thing in there is either a plant, fungus, or an algae.
Right.
Nothing comes from meat. So, people say, and even the WHO says, oh, well, meat's probably a carcinogen.
Hmm.
And yet not a single thing on that list was from meat. So if it is a carcinogen, what is the carcinogen and why don't you know what it is? Why can't you put a finger on it, right?
Exactly.
So, but there are all of these toxins and poisons in plants that are well described, well named, well cataloged, and their harms are quite severe, some of these things. And the WHO even says that these can be directly toxic. They can cause hormonal disruption. They can cause infertility, and they can be mutagenic or carcinogenic, right? So this is a well-known fact and phenomenon. And even the WHO, who pushes a plant-based diet and says meat's bad for you, they are specifically saying there are all these bad things in plants and
Hmm.
fungus. So, they have a bit of a mixed message there. And in that study in 2015 where they said that there's likely a link between meat and cancer, that has been discredited 1,000 times over by more credentialed people than I, and even the people that were on the panels. They said this was the most painful process they'd ever gone through because it was pure, it was just pure fraud. Basically, they were discounting very high level studies that showed benefits of meat and that there were no associations between meat and cancer or any other health issues. And they were bringing in very weak epidemiological associative studies in order to support their case. So this was ideologically driven, and but they still have these websites showing clearly that these things have toxins in them, and they all come from plants, fungus, and algae. Nothing from meat. Not They didn't have a single one from meat. It was all plants and fungus and so on. So we were obviously very taken aback by this when I was taking my cancer biology class. And I remember everyone just thought he must be joking. Someone has to be in on it, but he wasn't. He was not joking. And it sort of dawned on us that he was serious. And I remember thinking in my head, like, well, but vegetables are still good for you though, aren't they? And it sort of felt like he read my mind because he looked at us and he just said, I don't eat salad. I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm not going to eat any plants. And so that's what I did. I just went to the grocery store. I was looking around. I was like, okay, well, what can I eat? Everything has plants. Everything had plants in it. And so I
Right.
was just sort of walking around. I was just like, okay, eggs. Eggs don't come from plants. I get some eggs. Meat doesn't come from plants. I'll get some meat. And that's what I ate. I just ate eggs and meat. And for years and years and years, and my health absolutely soared after that. My athletic performance, went to all new heights. I was an All-American rugby player. I was playing in university and the senior levels and premiership levels, and in the U.S. and Canada, and I felt amazing, and I felt now my performance went even further, and I just turned into a very, very dominant athlete. And but intellectually, energy wise, all of these things improved dramatically. My health in all metrics improved dramatically, and continued to improve until I was in England playing rugby over there after university when I was 25. And some of the meat was breaded, had some crumbing on it. And I thought, well, dose makes the poison. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And that's what people will tell you now. Well, dose makes the poison. Yes, there are all these toxins in there, but, they're fine. I'm like, no, they're not. I found that out firsthand the hard way, or just having a bit of crumbing on this chicken, nothing else, nothing else,
Right.
just a bit of crumbs on chicken. And that wasn't even what I was eating every day. It was every now and then. A few months into it, I was getting weird little injuries. I was sore. I was sort of was didn't have the same exercise tolerance. I just did not feel myself. And I was still young. I was 25. And I remember thinking to myself, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? I normally can just never run out of energy, can never get tired, I can just push myself for days and just never ever reach my limit. Now I have a limit, and that's very strange to me. I don't know what's going on. And I was like, okay, am I not pushing myself as hard? Am I not training as hard? I couldn't figure it out. But looking back, that was when I sort of slipped off of it. And the biggest problem was is that I did slip off of it. And so now I wasn't looking at things going, I will not eat any plants whatsoever. It's like, oh well, a little bit every now is not a big deal. And then it was just a little bit more and a little bit more and then I was back to eating basically a normal whole food diet. I always cooked for myself. I didn't eat junk food, but
Hmm.
I'm mostly meat based. That was just always preference. And but people say, "Oh, you have to eat vegetables. You have to eat this." I'm like, oh, I don't know if you do. Like, well, it has these good things in it, sure, but it also has these bad things in it. So that's not the whole picture. Is just the good things. You can't cherry pick out the good things. You have to look at the bad things as well. And so, but little by little, things slip back in, and then it wasn't until sort of almost 6 years ago now, 5.5 years, that I came across information that showed me that no, humans actually are carnivores. That's just the kind of animal that we are. And that's what I was doing for 5 years. I was living as a carnivore. I was eating as a carnivore, and I had the physical benefits from that. And I have never felt better in my entire life than that 5 year period. And so I said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things, and I just stopped eating them. And so then at 38 years old, I dropped all these things and went back onto a high fat carnivore diet, started eating as much fatty meat as I cared to, stopped eating everything else. And within 2 weeks, I'd lost 23 pounds. I'd stopped having asthma. My allergies had gone away, and I felt so good. I was like, right, I'm going back to play rugby. And so I went back and started playing professional rugby again at 38, and I felt amazing. And I was back playing with people that had been training for months. I'd been doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. I'd been helping with the Rohingya population that sort of escaped into southern Bangladesh from
Right.
Burma. And I was volunteering there, so I was not working out. I was not able to eat the way I wanted to eat, and it just had to sort of make do. And then I got back, and 2 weeks on, I felt so good that I was like, right, I'm going to play rugby, and I felt great. I was able to work out as hard and train as hard and play as hard as everyone else who had been there for months and months and months and months and months and were in great shape. But just because of my diet, I was able to keep up and still perform at that level. And I haven't looked back since. And I've really dug into the research after that point, and I got really interested in it. Say, okay, what do we know about this? What can we prove? What is the evidence available? And I just started digging into the research, and I would spend, I don't know, 8 to 10 hours a day just reading studies for months after that. And that was just all I did because I was taking some time off work,
Right.
and so I had free time, and so I was just reading as many studies as I could, asking as many questions as I could, and then being able to apply this to medicine. Everything just sort of started slotting into place. We are carnivores, but we are not living as carnivores, and we're getting these diseases that you would see in zoo animals if they're being fed the wrong thing. And so everything just started slotting into place from that perspective. And I've now been applying that to my medical practice as well. And, thankfully, that's shown a lot of extremely promising and encouraging improvements for my patients.
Right. That's amazing, and that's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that
Mhm.
with us. And just from seeing your Instagram, things that you post on it, it's crazy. I mean, it's the first time I am listening to someone talk about how plants can be carcinogenic because, like you rightly
Mhm.
said, when it came out that meat, the link between meat and it being a carcinogenic, it really caught up like wildfire, and it's still going on. Like there's still so many, a big population of people believing that that is what it is, and it is really causing us the,
Mhm.
but really no one is talking about what plants are doing to us. And if you see India,
Mhm.
like maximum percentage of Indians are vegetarians, and even if they do eat meat, it's very few days a week. Like most of the meals are from grains and vegetables. So this is not something that
Mhm.
we hear, at least nobody in India, no doctors also talking about this, right? So why do you think that this is? Because you said that you studied about this 23 years ago, and I'm sure that this was still going on before you, right? Like they were still teaching this. But why is it that we
Mhm.
still are not hearing that many doctors being out loud about this, and even cancer specialists? Because I do know some
Yeah.
relatives or some family friends who, unfortunately had to go through cancer. And when you ask them about it, like, what did the doctor tell you, or what is it that you're changing in your lifestyle after this or going through this, there's really no trace of anyone telling them about, what plants are doing to them or why should they avoid it in any way.
Well, I mean, the unfortunate reality is that oncologists don't necessarily take cancer biology in college,
Mm,
unfortunately, and they aren't necessarily taught all of these same things in their oncological training. They're trained how to treat cancer. They're trained how to what medications to use on which people. These are the lab tests that you look for. These are the ways that you diagnose, and these are the diagnoses. And then once you have this problem, this is the treatment. They're not actually taught to think for themselves and rationally come to their own conclusions. It's residency is a cookie cutter sort of thing. You have to sort of teach people, hey, this is how we do it in current practice. Then you can go and maybe you can make adjustments in your own practice, but this is what standard of care is right now. So that's what you're taught. You're not necessarily taught cancer biology. You're not necessarily taught oncogenesis and how cancers actually form in the first place, and the competing theories that go into that, going back 100 years. The original theory was that this is a metabolic mitochondrial disease. It wasn't until 50 years later, 60 years later, that people said, no, no, this is just purely genetic. Because once we discovered DNA, everyone just said, oh, well, that's it, that's everything, everything comes from DNA. But that's actually not true. The mitochondria can actually run the cells. The DNA is your building, is your blueprints, but the mitochondria are the architects and your construction workers, right? They're using those blueprints to actually build the building and run the company, right? So it's very different. And so people will be taught this in cancer biology, but you don't necessarily take cancer biology. I took cancer biology because that was a particular interest of mine in my undergraduate degree, but it's not required for medical school. So
right.
that's one thing. But the idea that meat is bad and that plants are good, that was something that's very recent. That's a very recent assertion, probably only about 40, 45 years old. Before that, the argument was, no, meat is really good for you. It has all the nutrients that you have to have. You have to have meat, you have to have fat, and all these sorts of things. And when the USDA said in 1977 in America that cholesterol causes heart disease, you need to stop eating it. You need to stop eating saturated fat. There were untold amount of doctors that are saying this is a really bad idea. This is a really bad idea. These fats are really healthy. They're really important. You need them, and we're gonna be we're gonna have problems from that. And that's exactly what we've seen. They said, well, reduce saturated fat, reduce cholesterol, and you'll reduce heart disease. But that's exactly the opposite of what happened in America. We reduced red meat consumption by over 33%, reduced saturated fat consumption and cholesterol by over 30%, increased fruits and vegetables by 30 and 40% respectively, increased grains, increased sugars as well. But importantly, we reduced saturated fat and cholesterol. And since then, the heart disease rates have more than tripled. So what exactly are we saying how are we saying that that's a benefit? Now, some people will try and mislead you and say that actually there was a peak in the 60s and 70s and then that's since come down. That's not true. That there's a peak in cardiac related deaths and cardiovascular deaths. But the prevalence and the incidence and the rate of heart disease is going up,
Mm,
right? So deaths are coming down, but we also stop smoking. Like people largely have reduced smoking significantly, and that's a major driver of heart disease. And so people say, oh, well, it's because of the cholesterol, getting rid of cholesterol and getting rid of that. Well, that's what it is. Well, no, multiple things happen at that time. And also the prevalence is going up. Also, our interventions have gotten a lot better. We can stent people, we can do bypass surgery, we can get these things early, we can see when these blockages are starting to form, and we can take preventative actions. We put people on aspirin, we can do all these sorts of different things. There's a lot going on here that can reduce mortality. And when you have a heart attack, we can give you medications, we can take you to the cath lab, we can pull the clot out, put a stent in, and we can undo that blockage, and we can save your heart, we can save your life. And so reducing the number of people that have died, or the rates of people dying per 100,000,
right.
is not the same thing as reducing the rate of heart disease. The rates of heart disease, the number of people affected by heart disease has gone up, is continuing to go up, right? And people are getting younger and younger, getting these sorts of things. Oh yeah, no, children are developing atherosclerosis. Well, that never happened before. That was, that's something that's new. Well, what are we doing differently? Well, we're taking away meat, we're taking away fat, and we're giving people a bunch of carbohydrates and sugar, and that's a problem. The Inuit in northern Alaska, or in northern Alaska and northern Canada, they traditionally just eat blubber. They eat, seals and whales and polar bear and things like that. There are no plants available,
Mm.
100 miles from the North Pole, right? And
Yeah.
so they only eat meat. And they're like, oh, well, people eat kelp. I mean, who is telling you that? I mean, people just make this stuff up because people say, you have to have plants. Oh my God. So all they're eating is kelp, and they sometimes have some polar bear. That's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. It is an absolute outright lie. So they eat meat, and they only want to eat meat. And they have traditionally had lower rates of cardiovascular disease versus all other Canadians. And in fact, they're not all only eating meat, because they don't all live traditionally anymore. Some people are living in cities. They're flying in alcohol and cigarettes and other sorts of foods and junk food and things like that. And still, their rates of heart disease are a lot lower. And interestingly, the Inuit on average start smoking at 8 years old, right? So these are heavy smokers from very young age, and their heart disease rates are still lower than the rest of Canada, to the point that there was a study done in 1992 saying that, like, wow, their heart disease rates are so low, but they have all these huge risk factors, like just eating this huge high saturated fat, high cholesterol diet, not eating any fruits or vegetables or fiber or
Mm.
anything like that, and smoking, and heavy smoking, right? So maybe they're just genetically primed for this, and they have like low risk. Maybe they don't have they have a genetic protection against heart disease. So there are certain genetic markers that we look for, like relative risk for heart disease. You have these sort of genes, and that makes you more or less likely, more likely to have heart disease, right? So they're like, okay, well, our the thought is probably they don't have any of these high risk genes, so they'll be genetically, less predisposed to heart disease. Then they tested them. They found they had all the genetic risk factors for heart disease. So they have a higher genetic propensity for heart disease, which in fact is what you'll find when you look at those studies that don't differentiate when they look at people in the cities that are eating more of a Western diet, drinking alcohol and things like that. They have a much higher rate of heart
Right.
disease than other people, right? But when they're eating meat, when they're eating fat, when they're having a high cholesterol, high saturated fat diet, they have a much lower rate of heart disease. So, and they're genetically predisposed to getting heart disease as well. So, this is something that has vilified meat. And so starting from there, people have just said, okay, well, we know meat's bad because it has saturated fat. That's bad. That's the only thing that's bad. Get rid of that. And so that started the chain off, saying that meat was bad. Well, what do you eat if you're not eating meat? You're eating plants. Those are the only other option, right? So obviously, therefore, plants are good because they don't have saturated fat. That was the argument in the 1980s. Anything that didn't have saturated fat was de facto good for you. And so plants didn't have that. So you had unsaturated fats, and these are so much better for you. But there are large randomized controlled trials with thousands to tens of thousands of people, and interventional trials where you put people on unsaturated fats or saturated fats, and you reduce their LDL cholesterol. And in fact, cardiovascular death rate goes up.
Mm.
Okay. So that's not good. And these are randomized controlled trials. These are not epidemiological. Oh yeah, we sort of seeing this something happening out there with these, large numbers of people. No, you had an interventional trial, you changed something and it got worse, right? So saturated fat was better. And then we have large studies and epidemiology and all these sorts of things with hundreds of thousands of patients looking over decades, showing that people who have higher LDL cholesterol live longer, have
True.
less heart disease, have less Alzheimer's, less dementia, less cancer, right? Less all-cause mortality. So the idea that cholesterol causes a problem is wrong, but that's what vilified meat. And that's what said that plants were good. And it goes back further than that, because it was actually the sugar companies that put forward this false information saying that cholesterol was harmful because it's actually sugar that was doing the harm
Mm.
and seed oils and this processed foods that these companies were profiting greatly from. And there were studies that were coming out showing this, showing that there was a strong connection between refined sugar and heart disease, which was a very, very rare disease before the latter half of the 20th century. And in the 19th century, it was really nothing. It wasn't on the radar, you know. And really, in the first half of the 20th century, it really wasn't on the radar either until President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and people were like, "Ooh, what's going on? What's this heart disease thing?" And then they really started taking a closer look at it. But we know from published peer-reviewed journals like the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top medical journals in the world. They published in 2016 a study from UC San Francisco Medical School showing actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the 50s and 60s detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar, and to exonerate sugar and say that it was safe and just an empty calorie. That's where that phrase comes from, empty calories, from that study. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and it was he who authored and published the 1977 declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease. So we know this is a fraud. We know this person was a fraud. We know that he was paid. He had these contracts. He got paid $6,500 at the time, which is
Wow.
equivalent to about $50,000 now, right? Not $50,000 then, $50,000 now. Okay, so this was almost nothing. Got paid almost nothing for this, and that's what his integrity and the health of the world was worth to him. It was absolutely sickening, and he perpetuated this for decades of his career. And he ridiculed and attacked other doctors who were correct, like Dr. Yudkin from the UK, who wrote a book called "Sweet White Deadly," and it was all about sugar.
Mm.
And they basically laughed these people out of academia, saying that they were just these quacks that didn't know what the hell they were talking about, and they really actually ruined their reputations and careers because of this, knowing full well that they were right. And Ansel Keys was one of these con artists who were paid off by the sugar companies. We know what he was paid as well. He was on the payroll for decades. He was the one who came up with the cholesterol model for heart disease. It was a complete fraud. It was a complete fraud paid for by the sugar companies. And we know that. We know that it was a fraud. And he did some of these large randomized controlled trials trying to show that reducing cholesterol by putting people on a unsaturated fat diet would actually be better. And he found that it either didn't make people better or, in fact, in some studies, made them worse and
Mm.
made more people die. And so what did he do? Was he responsible and said, wow, maybe I got this wrong? No, he buried the study and wouldn't publish it. And it wasn't found until decades later. And they were like, well, why did you not publish this at the time? Was there something wrong with it? Was it a bad study? And they're like, no, there's nothing wrong with the study. We just, weren't too happy with the outcome. I was like, well, that's borderline criminal, you know, because they were pushing for decades that cholesterol was bad for you and saturated fat's bad for you, and yet they knew that it wasn't from their own study that they did and just wouldn't share with the public. They knew that that was false, and so that's where a lot of this comes from. But before that, everyone damn well knew that meat was good for you. Everyone knew that meat was excellent for you. To take India as an example, there's a lot of impoverished areas that don't eat a lot of meat. There was a study that just showed that if you increase, and it was a control trial, so they had other children, same age in the same schools. They gave some of the children one egg a day, one extra egg a day, and they found that I believe it was a year, that after a year they had increased their IQs as compared to their peers on average 15 points
Wow.
with just the addition of one egg. That's how important this is to our brains. That's how important this is to our bodies. Choline, especially, carnitine, all the saturated fats and cholesterol and things like that. These are vital for your body's development and your brain's development. And that's what's happening when we're kids and adolescents. Our brains are growing, our nervous system is growing. And if you don't have the correct nutrients and building blocks, you will not develop properly. You will not develop to your genetic potential. And this is something we see before the agricultural revolution. Our brains were 11% larger than they are now, right? And in fact, it was right away. It was right before agriculture and right after agriculture. Brain size went down 11%. Bang, right then, right? So that's not genetic. That's not a slow adaptation that's taken decades or sorry, millennia to come about, which just wouldn't happen anyway because our trajectory in brain size was going up, 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 and then bam, down. That doesn't happen. That's environmental. That's something that's poisoning a population and not allowing them to develop. So everyone knew for millennia that was the most important thing that we could eat. Fat was the most important thing that we could eat. That's only been papered over in the last sort of 40 years because of that. Before that, there were big moves by many different groups. One, the food industry in general was trying to push their products, their seed oils like Crisco and canola oil and these sorts of things. This is just a product they were pushing. So they're saying, oh, this is so much healthier. This is so much better. The hell it was trans fats. Those things will kill you. Those are just terrible for you. And they didn't exist. They didn't exist before the 1950s. So how is that something that's essential to us? How is that something that we need in our life if it didn't even exist before 1952? That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So, something that you have to have that didn't exist in some people's lifetimes. My parents were born in the 40s. This didn't exist when they were kids, but apparently it was essential to them and they just didn't even know it. So that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous assertion. And it's wrong. And so some of the influences were religious though. There's the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who some people may have come across. They're just people sort of keep to themselves, but they don't. They actually are pulling a lot of strings behind the scenes. So in the late 1800s, they had a prophetess who had a vision from God and said, God doesn't want us to eat meat. Meat makes us feel basically it fixes your hormones and makes you healthy. So people want to procreate because that's the meaning of life, right? Is procreation. So if you're healthy enough to procreate and have kids and support a family, your body goes, go make a family. That's your biological drive. And so when you eat meat, they found, wow, people want to procreate. They want to have sex, and lust is a sin. Therefore, meat is a sin. Meat makes you lustful, and therefore meat is sinful. And vegetables are good because they suppress lust. Basically, they trash your hormones and make you sick. And so you have no interest in sex and procreation. So that's not helping anyone. And but they really went on to that. Her protege was a kid named Harvey Kellogg, who grew up to be Dr. Kellogg, who grew up to be Congressman Kellogg, who founded Kellogg cereals. And he was a fanatic about this because he was a young boy in this church and he was writing down all of her writings, all her books. He was transcribing them out. And so he was absolutely full on into this. And so he was obsessed with other people having sex and masturbating. It like literally consumed him. He was the one who convinced the government to officially recommend that that males get circumcised in America. So this is why the vast majority of Americans would have been circumcised. It's sort of changing in the last several decades, but that was traditionally why, and that came from him. That was not for health reasons. That does not help your health. That was to make it more difficult to have sex and to masturbate. That was it. That was his motivation. His own writings say this, right? So he came up with Kellogg's. He pushed this out in order to try to suppress people's hormones, basically, and make them, less sexual. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually founded the field of nutritional sciences at the university level. So they started teaching nutrition classes at college. They're the first people ever. And they wrote the first nutritional textbook in 1925. And that is still in print. That's most recent edition is still being taught in university nutrition classes. They have institutions and sanitariums all over the world, and they run the curriculum for nutritional science and education around the world because they founded it and they've kept control of it the whole time. And so this is why you go to nutrition classes, you go to nutrition, study nutritional sciences, they all push plant-based diets, all of them. And the research that comes out is funded by them or other, big food research, like even Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH, right? And Pepsi and Nestle and Kellogg certainly are putting out large sums of money as well. And who is doing the peer review process? Well, this is peer reviewed. Obviously, the peer review process is a bit of a scam, honestly, because you have people in there that they basically are going to approve what they agree with, and you
Right.
can't get new ideas in because if that goes against my research, that's going to embarrass me. Nope, doesn't pass the peer review. That happens. That actually happens. And if you look at all these plant-based uh, nutritional studies that have come out, you look peer reviewed by Loma Linda Medical Center, which is a Seventh-day Adventist medical center. That's their medical school, right?
Yep.
And so they have an agenda, and they push this agenda very, very hard, and they do it from behind the scenes. They're not out there being overt. They're not being obvious. They're not letting you know what's going on. They're like the Wizard of Oz. They're the man behind the curtain. You don't even know he's there. Now you see the great and powerful Wizard of Oz, but it's actually this guy back here pulling the strings. And that's what the Seventh-day Adventist Church does. This is why places like Australia are very, very heavily influenced into plant-based eating, veganism, vegetarianism, because they have a very, very, very strong foothold here. The Seventh-day Adventist Church does, and they influence all the nutritional science classes, and they have a lot of influence here. And so anywhere they go, this is where they push, and it's for religious, dogmatic reasons. This is not for people's health, and they are pushing an agenda, and they are corrupting the nutritional sciences and the nutritional research to push their agenda. It is absolutely corrupt and base at its core.
I'm sure a lot of the listeners would resonate with this because, in India, a lot of Ayurvedic practitioners were claiming that if you eat meat, it would somehow, damage your emotions and you'll become more angry. And, that is what would
Mhm.
happen. And a lot of people did believe this because religiously, Ayurveda or no Ayurveda, like people, a lot of religions in India don't eat meat till now, right? They don't even eat egg, or some even don't even eat dairy at times. So, this adding on to that, it really creates a major impact. And that's so false to even say that without any scientific background to it, right? And the other thing is that it's so funny the way people fear meat, cholesterol, and fats today. Is that the other day I posted something on Instagram about eating mutton, red meat, right? And a doctor friend of
Mhm.
mine messaged me that it has so many fats and it's high in cholesterol and it has more demerits than merits. Why are you eating this? And this is coming from a doctor. So, that is the sad
Mm.
reality today, that instead of that, if I would have posted a pizza, nobody would say anything. They won't even message me about it. Like, it's normal. Okay, maybe it's a cheat,
Yeah.
something like that. But the fear around red meat specifically is so much higher than even eating junk food. So that's like the crazy reality
Mm.
today. I hope that we can,
It is.
go past it. So
Yeah.
these were some really great insights and some studies that you stated. I'm sure that this would really help our listeners to back up this belief and this way of the lifestyle that they would want to do, right? So that's really amazing to know. And also, something very interesting I saw you posting on your Instagram is about, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, celery dermatitis, right? So that's something I
Yeah.
the first time. And for a person with no medical background, just looking at it, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I'm seeing it, I'm thinking that if this is what is happening on our skin, with some reaction with the sun, if I'm not wrong, what is happening to our body on the insides if we are really consuming this on a
Mhm.
daily basis for years? Because celery juice, like kale juice, spinach juice, is like the biggest thing happening, right? Like even the healthiest cafes would offer that as the healthiest option right now, and people are going crazy with that. So, I mean, I don't know if there's this correlation, if this is what you wanted to portray through your post, but what does it
Mhm.
really would it do to our bodies on the inside if that is what is happening on our skin, just being exposed to this, right?
Yeah, so you're right. It does cause problems in your body as well. So what for those who haven't come across it, celery dermatitis is when people who handle celery, pick celery, they have to be very careful. They have to wear gloves, long sleeve shirts, hats, all these sorts of things, because just by picking the celery, they're absorbing what's called furanocoumarins, which are very light sensitive. UV light reacts with it and ends up it binds irreversibly to proteins and DNA and permanently damages them. And so you get these horrible burns. That's what you get, chemical burns. That's what happens. And people, oh, well, it's probably from the pesticides. No, 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 no. It's the plants themselves make these defense chemicals to stop animals and insects eating them. They're the original pesticides and insecticides are made by the plants. The plant makes 10,000 times more pesticides and insecticides by weight than the pesticides that we spray on them industrially, 10,000 times, right? So 99.99% of all pesticides are from the plant itself. So even if you grow it in your own garden, it's exactly the same. The pesticide is a drop in the bucket. Yes, it makes it worse. It doesn't make it that much worse. The natural toxins and carcinogens in mushrooms are 500 times more likely to cause cancer in lab studies than the pesticides sprayed on them, right? So specifically ALAR, that was a study out of UC Berkeley in 1989 from Professor Bruce Ames showing this, okay? So it is the plant itself that is harmful. It's not just the pesticides. Yeah, pesticides make it worse. The plant is worse than that. It's a lot worse than that. So yes, pesticides aren't great. Spinach and celery are worse. So celery has these franocoumorins. So do parsnips, carrots, all citrus fruits. So limes, lemons, grapefruit, oranges, all of them all have franocoumorins, and they're very light sensitive. So people squeezing limes in the sun, they can get second-degree burns on their hands. They get the horrible, horrible burns. Celery dermatitis. The post that I made was a young girl, and she was teething, so they thought celery was a good teething thing. They just sort of like chewing on that, and it helped bring the teeth out. And so they're getting some of the celery juice down her face, and she had second-degree burns on her face. This poor little girl just absolutely scorched her face where the celery juice had sort of dripped down. And when I posted that, a number of people actually commented and messaged me saying, hey, I actually grew up next to a celery farm, and this is exactly true. All the people they knew, they got the sap or anything on their skin, they would burn horribly. They had to be very, very careful. That's something that's actually well known to farmers who grow this crop. And so, if you're ingesting it, yes, this is still toxic inside of you. You can become light sensitive. I mean, we're telling people the sun, which we evolved in and have lived in for millions of years, all of a sudden this is bad for us now. This causes disease and cancer and it's so bad for you. Like our skin's just not designed to be in the sun. We're just designed to live underground like a mole or a worm or something like that. No, of course not. We're terrestrial animals. We're supposed to be out there in the sun. And and there are actually a ton of studies actually showing that people who spend more time outside and more time in the sun, they actually do healthier, they do better. And there's an inverse relationship between hours of sunlight and skin cancer. So we've been reducing the hours of sunlight over the decades. Skin cancers have gone up. It's reciprocal. So there's an inverse relationship. Now, I'm not saying that the sun cures skin cancer. I'm just saying that it's probably not causing skin cancer. There's more going on here because we're reducing the amount of sunlight and skin cancers are going up. So there's something else going on there. It's not just damage from the sun. But if we're eating a whole lot of plants that have these franocoumorins that make us more light sensitive, you're going to get more damage. You're going to get more DNA damage. You're going to get more mitochondrial damage, and you're going to get more cancer. That's easy, And so I think that's probably what's going on there. We're eating worse and worse things, and we're getting worse and worse problems as a result of it. Those franocoumorins go in your body actually interfere with how your body works. Your body needs to detoxify these things, go through your liver's cytochrome P450 pathway, these enzymes that detoxify a lot of things and metabolize medications as well. And so certain enzymes have to break down and detoxify these franocoumorins, like in grapefruit. And so this is why you can't take grapefruit or certain other foods with certain medications, because they'll both use the same enzyme and you'll run out. And so either you'll end up not getting enough of the medication or you'll get too much of the medication and you can get a toxic level. So these are things that are well described in the literature. Dermatology isn't something that everyone studies, but this is well described in dermatology. This is something that happens. And no, it can't possibly be, because plants are so good, they're so wonderful. Well, plants are good and they are wonderful, but they are not good and wonderful to eat, because they are living things. and they want to stay living things. And if you eat them, they die. And so, of course, they're going to be able to defend themselves. Plants as a kingdom make nearly 1 million different chemicals. Most of those are defensive in nature. Latex, we make latex glove, very useful. It's a very useful resource, right? Latex is a sap, it's very sticky, and it's a defense mechanism. And this is something that when an animal starts chewing these leaves, this sap comes out, this latex, and it's so sticky and tacky, it actually glues their mouth shut.
Mm.
And so they can't open their mouth anymore. So it's a very elegant way to stop that animal from eating that plant. The problem for the animal is that they usually cannot get their mouth unstuck again, and they die because they can't eat anymore. And so that the plant life is wild. Nature is kill or be killed for plants as well as animals. And so if that plant can't stop an animal from eating it with deadly force if necessary, that plant's going to die. And so it will meet that threat with violent aggression if it can and if it has to. So that's how it works. And so there's some plants you actually go near it, the fumes from it are enough to kill you. You don't have to touch it, you don't have to eat it. You just get near enough to it, you breathe it in, you'll die. And people have
Right.
there's a garden of deadly plants in England. And so you have to go there. You have to be very careful. You cannot come within a range of this plant, and so you can't touch anything, you can't do anything. You have to be very, very careful and have descriptions on how toxic these plants are. The head groundskeeper, of that, actually, a couple people have actually died from these plants, from getting too close to them, from interacting with them. They've actually died from the toxic nature of these plants, not eating them, not making a salad out of them, not doing that for decades and years, but just being too close to it one time and they died.
Right.
So these are actually quite serious, creatures. They're not messing around. They do not want to be bothered. They want to live their life, have their babies, and succeed. And the most successful ones are the ones who have been able to protect themselves. 97% of all species have all died, have all gone extinct, right? The only ones left are the ones that are extremely capable of self-preservation. And
Right.
so, everything that's come through the gauntlet of evolution is battle hardened. So we should not take that lightly. I think we are really underestimating the defensive capabilities of plants.
Right. Plants don't want us to eat them. That's like really true.
No.
And would you say that
Yeah.
with all this
Well,
research and these amazing insights that you've given us right now, to conclude that we plants and fruits are absolutely non-essential for us to eat if we are about to consume meat and eggs?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. No, you 100% don't have to eat plants. Now, you want to eat them because of pleasure or whatever, or necessity. Like if you're in a situation where you just don't have access to meat. I mean, that is actually a great survival advantage, that we've been able to identify certain plants that we can survive on.
Right.
Suboptimally, it's not the best thing for us, but we can survive, so that's good. And that's great. I mean, I don't ever plan on eating another plant again, unless I'm starving to death and I have no other option. That's it. And that's what plants are for. And that's a good thing. It's good to have that safety net, right? Well, it's like having a spare tire in your trunk for your car, right? You don't want to just drive on the spare tire the whole time,
Right.
right? But if you have a flat, you put it on, it gets you where you need to go, and then you get the tire back on. So it's a good, emergency precaution. That's great. That's great to have that. But it's not. But I don't want four spare tires on my car. That's not going to run very well. That's not going to be a great idea. So what plants are. We know you don't need to eat any plants because there are civilizations alive right now, like the Inuit, like the Nanette, like sometimes even some of the Maasai and other African tribes. They just don't eat any plants. They have access to them. The Native Americans in the 1800s and before, they would just eat buffalo, and they were actually the tallest and healthiest population on Earth. And that's been measured, that they were the tallest humans on Earth. And the average height of a population denotes the average health of the population. So these guys were pushing 7 feet tall. These were huge, huge people. They were very strong, very powerful, very smart, huge brains, and extraordinarily healthy. They lived to be 110, 120, 130 years old. And people say, well, that can't be true. They must have just been making that up, because you don't have official birth certificates or anything like that. Well, that's true. But we do know as geneticists that we're actually designed to live on average 120 years. So they actually got exactly right. So if you're going to lie about something, if you're going to exaggerate something, it's funny that they got the exact number that we're designed to live, right?
Right.
That's a bit far-fetched. So they got it exactly right. And we actually know, going back to Herodotus, the original, the father of history, um, he chronicled different interactions between different famous sort of interactions. The emissaries from the Persian Empire came down to Ethiopia, and they were visiting with them. Excuse me. And they said, the king of Ethiopia asked the ambassador, okay, what does your emperor eat, and how long do your people normally live? And so he described making bread and growing wheat and all that. And they said, well, our people would live around 70 years. That's a normal
Right.
lifespan, is 70 years. This is 2,500 years ago, right? And so he said, and the king of Ethiopia sort of laughed at him and said, well, no wonder you live such short lives if all you eat is dirt. We only eat the boiled meat, and we only drink the milk of our cattle. And
Mm-hmm.
our people would live 120 years, sometimes much longer. So again, that could be him just being braggadocious, but it's exactly the number of what we know as geneticists that you're supposed to live to, as long as you don't mess up. So average life expectancy genetically means that if you don't mess up, if you don't hurt yourself and die young, you should live 120 years without doing anything special. You should just make it 120 years. So why are we
Wow.
dying in our 60s and 70s? That's literally middle age. So people say, well, I ate a spinach salad. That didn't kill me. Obviously, it's not poison. Well, you're dying in your 70s. You're dying 50 years young, 50 years early, right? You've been poisoned. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
People say, well, people say that about, spinach and vegetables and fruit. Sure. Right. Yeah, you're not dead that day. However, people have died from that. Liam Hemsworth put himself in the hospital with acute oxalate poisoning from having green smoothies and spinach every day. So he put himself in the hospital. People have died from acute oxalate poisoning and other poisoning from other plants that we would eat on a regular basis. But the point is that you don't need to die right away for something to be bad for you, right? People smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day and drink alcohol. They don't die that day. They live until they're 70, and they're like, oh well, but they're sick, and
Exactly.
their bodies are getting worse. And it takes decades, but it builds up over time, over the years, over the decades, and gets you worse and worse and worse. And then eventually they die young, right? And that's what we're seeing. But we do know, I mean, look at these populations that don't eat any plants. And the Inuit, I think the Inuit are a good example because there are just no plants for them to eat,
Mhm.
regardless, right? So there's just no choice, right? So they just eat that. So if you say, well, the Maasai could eat some, and the Native Americans, they could have eaten some. I mean, the Native Americans really didn't, especially the ones eating buffalo. But you could say, but who knows? Who knows what they ate exactly, right? Because they had access. The Inuit do not have access, so there's no option either way. And yet they live generationally, generation after generation. Well, maybe they're special. Maybe they're specially adapted. No, not really. We're specially adapted because of agriculture. That's new. The ice ages were all what the Inuit are doing now. That's the original design for humans. Okay. The new addition was eating plants. That's new. Eating meat we've been doing for millions of years. Eating plant is very, very recent, right? And
Oh,
so agriculture has only come about in the last 10,000 years, right? And so, that's the adaptation. So you have different populations that have been exposed to agriculture longer. And, like people from India, people from Europe, we've had agriculture far longer than sub-Saharan Africa, Australia, North America, South America, right? Far longer. And so we're more adapted to that. So that's the special adaptation, is
right.
is being able to weather the toxins from plants a bit better. But we're not perfect at it. We're just better than the Native Americans, than the Native Australians. So that's the adaptation. So people say, well, they're specially adapted to live up in the north and things like that. No, that's not true. We're the special adaptations. We came down from the north. But if you look at the ice ages, that was most of our ancestors would have had to live through several ice ages. And they said, well, people were just moving towards the equator. That's what happened. No, they didn't. All the fossil records show that when the ice was coming down, we were going up into the ice. going after the mammoth, going after the megafauna, going after all the game that we wanted to hunt. And so, that was what we ate. There weren't plants available. So people were living during ice ages. They were living during, up in northern, they don't eat any plants. They don't have any plants to eat. So we know we don't have to eat those things. We
Right.
know that. And so you definitely get all the essential nutrients that you need from eating meat. What do we need to do to eat? We need to get fat and protein and nutrients to build and maintain animal tissue. We need to build and maintain meat. So it's going
Hmm.
to have everything that you need to build and maintain meat. Meat. That's
Right.
exactly what it is. It's very easy to take animal tissue and use that to grow your own animal tissue. It's very difficult to turn plant tissue and fungi tissue and turn that into animal tissue. It's very difficult to do that. And
Hmm.
there are only a few amount of animals that are actually able to do that pretty well. We're not very well adapted to doing that. So it's much easier to turn meat into more meat. I was just going to say, we were talking about plants don't want you to eat them, and people say, well, what about fruit?
Hmm.
The plant wants you to eat fruit. Well, the plant wants something to eat fruit, usually birds, but it's not necessarily you, right?
Hmm.
Because if you think about it, again, if you get lost in the woods, you can't eat any random berry.
True.
Most berries will kill you. Most fruit will kill you. There are some fruit that are safe to eat that won't kill you, but still, the majority of fruit will kill you. There's a bird called the cassowary bird that shows up in the tropics in Australia and elsewhere, and it's a frugivore. It only eats fruit,
Right.
and there's about 150 different fruits that it eats. Every single one of those fruits will kill you. Every single one of those fruits will kill anything besides the cassowary bird that eats it,
Hmm.
because that seed will only germinate in the gut of the cassowary bird. So they had this coevolution where the cassowary bird was evolving with the plant, and the plant's becoming more and more toxic to everything else, and the cassowary bird is evolving with it to be able to handle those toxins, so that only the cassowary bird can eat that, because it has to be eaten by a cassowary bird. If that seed is not eaten by a cassowary bird, that seed does not become a plant, so it does not go on to the next generation. So if a cassowary bird actually leaves an area, those plants go away,
Hmm.
right? And so, it has to have that. Or if other things are eating that fruit, those plants go away. So it can't do that. So it has to be very toxic. And it's the cassowary bird's the only one that can eat this. So that's true of a lot of berries and a lot of fruit. That's where they really evolved with, is with birds.
Right.
And so we're not birds.
Mhm.
Some fruits we can eat, like the sweeter fruits, like fructose. We think that fructose is the sweetest of the sugars because we've evolved to recognize it as safe. It's not something that's going to kill you that day, but we do know that there are toxins in there, like fructocoumarins in oranges and limes and things like that. So even though there is fructose in some of these citrus fruits or other plants, that doesn't mean that it has no toxins. It just means that it's much less acutely poisonous. It won't kill you that day. It's something you can eat, you can survive on. You can get a quick hit of energy from the fructose and the carbs, and then you can go on to survive and to get your kill. And so, you know, that's better, right? So that they have less toxins. But if you're not letting it vine ripen, if you're not letting it ripen on the tree, it's going to be much more toxic, because it has a lot more toxins when it's not ready to go, because the seeds aren't ready to go. So it doesn't want to be eaten until the seeds are ripe, right? And so that's when the fruit gets ripe, is when the seeds are ready. And then it says, okay, we'll ripen, we'll reduce the amount of poisons. And so there are a lot less poisons in there. There's still some there, but they're a lot less. So if you pick that early, like we do in commercial farming, and first of all, we've grown these things. No plants that we eat now existed 50,000 years ago. None, right? We've bioengineered all of these things and changed them from their natural form. All the fruit, none of the fruit that we're eating now existed back then. They've
True.
been bioengineered to be much more sweet. So they have much more sugar. And so, that's a problem, because sugar's a problem. Yes, you can survive on it. You can get some energy from it. Fine. But you have it continually every day, you have too much of it, you will actually cause problems. Fructose has been shown to break down the same byproducts as alcohol. So you get the same damage to your body from fructose as you do from alcohol. So you get fatty liver disease, cirrhosis, diabetes, heart disease, even implicated in things such as cancer and Alzheimer's, right? And then it also is addictive. right? So this is helping the plant addict you, so you eat that thing and you move its seed. So it helps the plant, it doesn't help you, right? Maybe it gives you a quick hit of energy, but that's it. And so it's addictive. It gives a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines. And there are MRI studies showing that eating fructose, people that are addicted to fructose, sugar addicted, and metabolically sick, they kill the same areas of their brain from eating sugar as meth addicts, and they kill their brain to the same extent as meth addicts, right? So this has been shown on MRIs. So that's terrifying, right? So this is a
Mhm.
drug. This is a real drug, and it is very, very harmful. And we're giving this to kids. Well, kids like it. They like a cookie. Oh, give him a cookie as a kid. No, he's a kid. Do not give him a cookie. Would you give him meth? Would you give him alcohol? No, of course you wouldn't, because those are harmful. I'm sure you'd enjoy them. That's not the point. He's going
True.
to be harmed by them. It's a drug. So it's not good for you. I actually spoke with a colleague of mine. He's a doctor from India, and he was sort of some older at that time, and he was now practicing in Europe. And all this research was coming out on fructose and how this was really causing diabetes and metabolic syndrome and things like that. And he was just like, wow, that's really interesting. And he told me, I forget the name of the region in India, but he said, it's actually funny you mentioned that, because there's a region in India where 3 months out of the year, the wild mango, they grow so plentiful that they're just dropping all over the place. It's just like all the people there can just eat mangoes for 3 months out of
Mhm.
the year. They only eat mangoes. And they said that area has the highest type 2 diabetes rate in all of India. And the government actually had to step in and say, hey, you can't eat as much mangoes. You have to limit the amount of mangoes. You have to eat other things too, because this is just out of control.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Of course, that
Yeah.
makes
So even yeah.
yes, yes, please
Oh,
go
sorry, go
ahead.
on. Oh, I was just saying. So even fruit, people say, well, fruit's not as bad as juices and sodas. Yeah, definitely not. It's not as bad, but it can still be bad, and you can still get a lot of sugar from these bioengineered fruits that have way more sugar than they're supposed to have. A normal mango, a wild mango, does not have really hardly any sugar in it. It's very mildly sweet at best, and really fibrous and big seed in it. It's not like the mangoes that we see. So even then, so most fruit not good for you, and then the sweet fruits are not good as well because of a lot of sugar.
Right. So two things here. First is a list of plants, and second is talking about grass-fed meat, right? So talking about plants, like of course, we should the best thing to do is to just not consume any fruits and plants, right? But that can be quite overwhelming for a lot of people listening to this. So what would you say are some of your big no's, like absolutely no's, that we should just starting from today not go for them at all?
Mhm.
Uh, if you can just give us
Yeah.
some.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a very good question. And if people can't sort of jump on, to what I do, which is only eating meat and water, any meat's fine. It doesn't have to, be beef, lamb, chicken, fish, pork, whatever, seafood. It doesn't really matter. But, whatever you enjoy and prefer and works for you in your area. But as far as getting rid of things, I mean, I do think it's as important what not to eat as what to eat. And so, that's why I don't eat any plants. I eat no sugar, no sweeteners, and nothing artificial. And so I don't even use sauces or seasonings or drinks or anything like that. It's just meat, it's just water. But if you wanted to sort of just reduce some of these things, I think a major one to get rid of is, first of all, obviously all ultra processed foods, all that, like anything someone else made, don't eat it, you know?
Right.
And so, just eat normal food, right? So focusing on meat, eating more meat, and eating more fat. Fat's very good for you. It's very important. It is normal for doctors to say, oh, you have to stay away from saturated fat, but it's wrong. That's wrong. The Journal of the American College of Cardiology, top cardiology journal in the world, published in 2020 a massive literature review going through all the best data, all the meta-analyses, all the randomized controlled trials, all the best evidence, and found that there is no connection between increased saturated fat intake and heart disease. None. It's not
Mhm.
connected. Saturated fat is not even associated with cardiovascular disease. And in fact, they found an inverse relationship between saturated fat and stroke rates, right? So if you eat more saturated fat, you're protected against strokes. You have less strokes. And if you eat less saturated fat, you have more strokes. No, thank you. Strokes are devastating. They ruin your life or even kill you. I just don't. I mean, if you don't die, you're crippled and paralyzed.
Mm.
potentially. So it's a big, big, big problem, and saturated fat protects against this. So this is just wrong. Um, but if you're going to be cutting things out, I would start with carbohydrate, with ultra processed foods, all the processed foods. Get rid of seed oils, especially any cooking oil, any vegetable oil, all that stuff. That has to go. Only cook with animal fats, and get rid of carbohydrates and sugar, alcohol, obviously. Get rid of those things. So that would include grains and potatoes and all these sorts of things. And those are quite bad. I would also get rid of any nuts or seeds or beans. So a bean and a grain and a nut, all seeds. These are all seeds, and a seed is a plant's baby, and everything protects its baby more than anything. And so you will generally find there's a higher concentration of worse toxins and poisons in the seed than anything else. And this is why a lot of people find that they have sprouted germinated, sprouted seeds. They're like, oh, well, these are better. Oh, I feel so much better on this. Yeah, because there's so much poison in that, and then it starts growing and it starts getting rid of some of those poisons, right? So if you're eating just seeds and grains and all that stuff, that these things are generally worse than anything, and especially beans. Beans are loaded with lectins that
Mm.
are extraordinarily toxic to you. As little as 5 kidney beans have been known to put people in a hospital, as reported by the WHO, right? So these things are absolutely toxic. And so yes, you can cook them and you can prepare them and ferment them in ways that sort of reduce the toxicities, but that doesn't get rid of the toxicities. That doesn't make them totally safe. It just makes it better than it was. It makes it survivable, but that
Mm.
doesn't make it good. So I would get rid of all those. Anything with carbohydrates, anything with seed oils, anything with sugar, get rid of. And then after that, I would get rid of nightshades. So
Right.
that's potatoes, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, capsicums. Nightshades are a family of plant that are just more toxic than
Mm.
others, and they have a lot of solanine, and this can kill you. This can actually kill you. People actually still die from eating potatoes, which is crazy to think about. But when if you leave, you have to keep so you have to store potatoes in a dark root cellar. If it stays out and it turns green, that's toxic. Oh no, it turns green. You have to throw it out. Usually, I got taught that when I was a kid. You have to throw that out. You can't let it turn green. You have to throw it out. Well, what does it mean it's bad? Well, it's creating more solanine because it says, oh, I'm being exposed to UV light. I'm
Mm.
unburied. Something's trying to eat me. I need to make more poison, right? And so it's going to be a toxic level of solanine. Or if it grows a root, you have to cut that whole eye out. You can't just cut the root off. You have to cut the whole eye out, or just throw away the potato because it's toxic. It has much more solanine now. And so people who don't get told that as a kid, or maybe just ignore it, they can actually die. They can get very, very sick. So I get rid of those, and then I get rid of any high oxalate items. So
Mm.
like sweet potato, you would have gotten rid of this before because of the carbohydrates. I think that carbohydrates are a big one to get rid of because they fundamentally derange your metabolic system and
Right.
your biochemistry. So we don't want carbohydrates. We make carbohydrates. We don't need to eat carbohydrates. In fact, we do much better when we don't eat carbohydrates.
Right.
And that's where all of our heavy machinery come to bear biochemically. We work much better as animals and as humans and biochemically, physiologically when we don't eat carbohydrates. So get rid of those. But sweet potatoes do have a lot of people go to sweet potatoes because they're not nightshades and they're not as toxic as normal potatoes, but they
Right.
have a high oxalate content. They have a huge oxalate content, which is a defense chemical, which is toxic. Turns into oxalic acid in your body, which you don't want. It strips out iron and minerals and vitamins and magnesium and calcium from your body. So you have to strip that from your bones to perpetuate your serum calcium level, or else you die. You can't get too low on your calcium. Your heart will stop. So this is very bad. And then spinach has massive, massive, massive oxalate content. And so I would just sort of do that and just sort of wean yourself down and wean yourself down. And when you sort of get rid of most of those the more toxic things, I would eat a I would eat different things all the time
Mm.
because we do have a capacity to detoxify these things.
Right.
But if you're eating the same thing day after day after day, just like if you're drinking alcohol day after day after day, you're just going to wear down your body's ability to detoxify this stuff safely, and you're going to get a buildup. And so, if you're eating a little bit of plants and things like that, and you're just mixing it up, you'll get exposed to different amounts of poison, different kinds of poisons, and you'll be able to detoxify those things. Your body will heal from the other things. You'll make more enzymes, and you'll be a bit better off. Best thing would be just to not eat poison at all, and then you don't have to worry about that. But if you want to, I would get rid of those things, those other things first and foremost, and then eat a small amount of a wide variety of things, and I would change it up all the time. I would not just keep eating the same salad every single day. That's a really bad idea.
Right, exactly. Just to add to this over here, and you can choose not to answer this as well, but because, like you said, getting rid of nightshades and some other things as well, right? And you yourself don't consume any vegetables or fruits at all. I
Mm,
recently read in a book by Dr. Mindy Fast Like a Girl, in which she talks about gut microbiome health, right? And in that, it
mm,
says that you should be a good way to keep a check on what you're feeding your gut microbiome, and a good way to sort of enhance its function or its health is to make a list of everything you eat in a month. Like it would include spices and things like ginger, garlic, and turmeric, all of these things, and meats, And if this can cross like till 200 different varieties, 200 different things, it's a good way to keep a check on what you're feeding your gut microbiome. So, how
mm.
does this sort of fit in? Of course, you can choose not to answer this if it's like controversial or something like
No,
that.
it's fine.
Yeah, like how
Yeah.
does this fit in? Like, then how are we supposed to consume these things to fit into a carnivore plan?
Well, first and foremost, the our understanding of gut microbiome is still very, very early. We have no hard definitive sort of answers, and long before we ever discover the microbiome, I mean, people have been arguing up and down and sideways about what we should eat, what plants we should eat, all these sort of for other reasons as well, and we haven't even figured that out yet. I mean, I think I have. I think you just eat meat, but that's still being argued. So, microbiome is a very, very burgeoning field, and it is something that we just simply do not have all the answers for.
Mhm.
Um, but so the thing is that I think what that person's doing, what a lot of people are doing, is they're in legal terms they call it assuming a fact that is not in evidence. So they're saying, well, you have to do this and this and this. I'm like, okay, well, what's the proof of that? What is your
Right.
evidence for that? And I said, well, you have to eat all these different things to get this diverse microbiome. Do you? I mean, who says, right? There have been microbiome studies in carnivores, like the Inuit, that
Hmm.
actually have an extremely diverse and extremely healthy microbiome. Okay, they
Right.
don't eat all these plants. They don't eat 200 different things. They're eating a bunch of turmeric and asparagus and things like that. They have very, very healthy microbiomes. They only eat meat. If we're going back to first principles, which is all you should do. You always go back to first principles. What is the fundamental basis that we're working on here? Biologically, humans are animals. We are the same species. So you will never find an example in nature of two members of the same species with different optimal diets. If they have different optimal diets, especially if one is carnivore or herbivore or omnivore, those are different species. They
Hmm.
can't be anything else because they have fundamentally different digestions and biology and physiology, right? So they're not the same species. And so we are the same species, right? And so we have the same optimal diet. I argue that's a carnivore diet, but it is something. It is something. And so if we're eating what we're designed to eat, what is optimal for us, our biome is going to be optimal because that's what we were designed to have. Because what you eat develops and supports your microbiome and your oral biome, right? And so when you eat what you're supposed to eat, that gives you the microbial support that you were supposed to have because they're eating what you're eating.
Right.
And so if we're designed to eat meat, we will have the biome that we are designed to have. And that's exactly what we see. That's exactly what we see. We see
Absolutely.
people with eating a carnivore diet who have exceptionally healthy oral and intestinal microbia. Okay, so
Right.
before the agricultural revolution, people didn't get cavities. They had
Hmm.
perfectly developed teeth, big wide jaws, and they had all their wisdom teeth. And then as soon as that changed, They had smaller jaws, crowded teeth, crooked, bunch of cavities, rotting out teeth, and and they weren't developing properly. Okay, so that's because we're eating the wrong things, right? And there was no ultra processed food back then. It was just grains and leaves and fruit occasionally, seasonally. But that we didn't have refrigerators, we didn't have greenhouses, we weren't shipping this stuff from other, from the equator and all these other sorts of things. So fruit was seasonal, and so they ate these things and they got worse. On average, they're 5 inches shorter right after the agricultural revolution. Brains were 11% smaller. Teeth were crowded. Teeth were crooked. Teeth were rotting out of their heads, right? So that's because they had the incorrect oral microbia, right? A number of dentists are turning to carnivore now because they're like, this is the best thing for your dental health. You don't get cavities when you only eat meat. When you're eating carbohydrates, when you're eating sugars, when you're eating those sorts of things, it grows and breeds the bacteria that actually rot your teeth and eat away your enamel, right? How can that be good for you? How can that be the right diet? If it rots your teeth, if it destroys your oral health, then it cannot be your optimal diet, right? No animal in nature has dentists, right? They don't brush their teeth. They don't floss. They don't have toothpaste. They don't use fluoride. They have perfect teeth. You lose your teeth in the wild, you die. So, sometimes, in fossils, the teeth are the only things that remain. They're so strong. They're the hardest part of your whole body. And yet they're rotting out of our mouth. Why? Because we're eating the wrong things. And so we're having the wrong microbia. So we have very direct evidence. We've tested people. We've tested the Inuits. We say, yep, that's it. That's exactly what we want to see for our limited understanding of microbiome. Exactly what we want to see for a microbiome, right? We also have other direct evidence, which is their teeth don't rot, and then different people who just eat meat, their teeth don't rot. You have all these explorers that go to, sub-Saharan Africa or Australia or, North America, and none of these people have brushed their teeth. None of these people have, flossed or had dentists or anything like that. And one of the things I always say, dark-skinned people with bright white teeth, white teeth. That's one of the common descriptions in these early texts, is that they had these glowing white teeth. Why is that? They didn't have polydent. They didn't have whitening services or anything like that. They're eating what they're supposed to eat, and their teeth worked the way they're supposed to work. Their biome worked the way they're supposed to work. Their microbiome worked the way it worked. So, saying that you absolutely have to eat all of these different things or else you just won't get the biodiversity, that's assuming a fact that's not in evidence. There's no proof of that. Now when you compare that to people who just eat, who's not eating a wide variety of plants and who's not eating a whole bunch of whole foods in society right now? People that are eating ultra processed junk food. That doesn't have if you eat more fiber, if you eat more this is better. No, only when compared to eating even worse things. If you're eating ultra processed food, doesn't have any fiber in it, right? It's not the lack of fiber. It's not the fiber that's helping you. It's the not eating the ultra processed crap. That's what's helping you. And so you're getting away from that. You're eating things that have fiber in it. You're eating whole food. And also this is a healthy user bias, right? Because you're more in tune with your health. You're making healthy choices in food. You're going to make healthy choices elsewhere in your life. You're not going to smoke. You're not going to drink. You're not going to stay out too late. You're going to get to bed on time. You're going to work out and exercise as well. So there are other things going on there as well. So the idea that this helps with biome. Well, what are they comparing it to? They're not comparing it to me. They're not comparing it to the Inuit. They're not comparing it to other carnivores. They're comparing it to people eating a standard processed food diet that is largely plant-based. The standard American diet is 70% plant-based because that's what processed foods are. They're processed plants, right? And so it's already a plant-based diet, right? It's just ultra-processed plants with a lot of seed oils and sugars, right? And processed carbs. So it's even worse. And so you get to a whole food diet, things get better. Fine, I'm with that. But that doesn't mean that those plants are what are generating the microbiome that you want. It's that those ultra processed foods are really deranging your microbiome and making things a lot worse. Because when you just eat meat, you have the perfect microbiome. So why are we worried about this?
True. No, that absolutely clarifies this, and this is something genuinely that came up for me. Just one last
Yeah,
question I
yeah, that's fine.
is that talking about grass-fed meat and organic, right? Look, so like when I heard about this, and okay, now it's good that I can eat meat and I should be eating this. But then what the setback that comes in is like you should eat grass-fed, you should eat organic, right? How important is it to sort of go for these choices? Because in India, it's like almost the last thing that you can do, because like even the butcher would not know the answer to this, or even they wouldn't know the source, or that kind of a stuff happening with the consumer and the
Mhm.
butcher, or where they source their meats from. Now, there are two things over here. What should we be more careful about is like our meats, like chicken getting medicated today, and like steroids or whatever that is. It's not really the most original way that we get it like we used to, right? Should we be more careful about this, or more careful about consuming what plants are we consuming?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to get rid of all plants and just go to meat. So, I mean, I eat store-bought meat. I go to Costco. It's not grass finished. Most animals will spend most of their life eating grass. Well, the ruminant animals that eat grass will spend most of their life just eating grass. The monogastrics like pork and chicken, they're generally fed just feedlot garbage, their whole life. So they're eating like corn and soy and things like that. And so that's not great. But
Right.
that's why a lot of people do better on red meat, like beef, lamb, goat, things like that, and or venison. That's great. If you can get wild venison, even better. And so, uh, I think of it as well. I think the most important thing is to get rid of all the plants and everything like that, right?
Right.
And that's why my hard rule is no plants or fungus, no sugar or any sweeteners, nothing artificial, and that goes for sauces, seasonings, and drinks, as I mentioned. And so that I think is the number one most important thing. Once you get rid of all of those things and you're eating more meat, your life and your health will improve in such dramatic ways that I mean you'll literally feel like a different breed of human. And in a lot of ways you will be, because your body will be working so differently than every other person on earth. It will just be that stark of a contrast. You just feel like a very different kind of human. And it's amazing. It's an amazing feeling. And that's why people say, well, you're very disciplined. You don't eat any plants. I'm like, it takes no discipline. Like I have no interest in eating that. I've never felt better in my entire life. And it's not even a close. I feel 1,000 times better than I've ever felt in my entire life. I never want to not feel like this. And so I'm never going to not eat like this if I can. So as far as the meat that I eat, I eat store-bought meat. I do, you look objectively at the nutrient complement of grass-fed, grass-finished, regeneratively raised animals. It's 4, 5, sometimes 10 times the nutritional complement of store-bought meat and eggs. Great, that's really good. Not everyone has access to that, right? But
Right.
a normal store-bought, grain-finished cow or lamb or whatever, it's still better than anything else you're ever going to eat, right? So it's
True.
still absolutely amazing to eat. So it's very, very nutrient dense. It's wonderful. Maybe throw in a bit of liver or something like that has even more nutrients. Not too much liver. People overdo it on liver and
Hmm.
other organs. And you can get too much of a good thing, especially the fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A. You can start getting too much vitamin A, hypervitaminosis, and that can actually start messing with your body. It can suppress your thyroid. It can suppress other hormones, and so that's not great. So you just want to keep it in proportion, right? You have a buffalo, and it has 1,500 pounds of meat and fat that you can eat. That would feed you as an individual for 2 years, right? It has one liver, right? So you're gonna finish that liver, and then it's just gonna be muscle meat the rest of the time. So keep that in mind. Keep that proportionality in mind. You don't want to eat 500 grams of liver every day. You just don't. That's too much. And so a little bit every now and then is fine. But I think of I think of grass fed and finished and grain finished meat in the same way as the Olympics, right? So golden, so silver medalists at the Olympics lost to gold, right? That's true. But the silver medalists also beat everyone else on earth, right? So it's
Right.
not actually a bad position to be in. So yes, regeneratively raised, grass fed and finished meat, if you can get it, is better. But if you
Right.
can't, it's still better than anything else you could ever eat. So I'm very satisfied with that. It's not a big deal.
That's amazing. That's a big relief, I'm sure, for a lot of our listeners, because that becomes very difficult, much more difficult in India to
Mhm.
find that, right? So thank you so much for sharing these amazing insights and these amazing studies and researches with us. It's really great to have you here today. As we conclude our episode, is there any last message or thoughts that you'd like to leave us with today?
Oh, well, well, thank you very much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure. I hope that people did get something out of that. And what I think I'd like to leave people with is, if this did interest you and it is something you said, okay, well, maybe this is intriguing, maybe I'll look into it. Please do. Please look into it. Just look at, people, myself and others. I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and people go there. I make a lot of videos that talk about these sorts of things, and I reference the science, I reference the studies, and you can go and check. You can check my work and see if you agree with it, and see, oh no, I don't agree with that. That's not a good study. I think it actually shows something else. Fine, but at least you have done your homework and you've looked into it and you know what the arguments are, because that's the thing. That's what John Stuart Mill said. He said, if you only know your side of the argument, then you don't know much. If you
Mm,
haven't actually heard the argument in its most compelling form from its most ardent, supporter, then you don't even know what the argument is. You just
true.
know what someone else told you the argument was. So you know a straw man version of the argument. So you need to go just find and say, okay, what is the argument? What is the evidence? You look at my arguments, look at what I've laid forward, you look at how I presented that, you look at what I've used to support it. And then you can go and look at people saying, oh, plant-based and whatever. Fine. Go look at them, and then you see and you decide for yourself what you think is right for your life, because that's what it is. This is you deciding what happens to your life, and it's very important because no one else is going to take care of you better than you are. And so if you don't go and do this homework, if you don't arm yourself with this knowledge, no one's going to do it for you, and the only one who's going to suffer is you. And so I just encourage people to go and do this, and then arm themselves with the knowledge, and then try to get better. This is something that I'm seeing as a doctor has been the biggest change to medicine that I've ever seen in my entire life, that I've ever even heard of. That we are reversing massive amounts of diseases that heretofore thought were just completely incurable, like autoimmune issues. Many people are fighting their cancer by eating differently and having massively successful results. And so this is something that we see because it's these foods, these toxic foods that we are not designed to eat. I believe these things are causing the diseases. So just like if you have lead poisoning, the thing to do for lead poisoning is you stop the exposure to lead, and then things
Right.
start getting better, right? So it's the same thing with plants. So you get rid of all the plants, you just start going back to the basics, just eating meat, and then all of a sudden all these problems just start drifting away. It is absolutely amazing. It's absolutely incredible. And so especially someone suffering from diabetes, heart disease, even cancers. Did a video on cancer with one of the top cancer researchers in the world, Professor Thomas Seyfried, and he has over 150 peer-reviewed publications on cancer biology and nutrition. And autoimmune diseases, especially, these things just disappear on a carnivore diet, or people with young
Wow.
kids who want the most for them and the best for them and the best for their development and their brain and their body, so they can live their maximal life and to their maximal genetic ability. Then this is something that I would highly recommend people look into and just see if you agree with me, and give it a try. 30 days. It's not that long. It's not a lot of people's lives, and you'll see a stark contrast in how your body and brain works.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Thank you so much for this lovely message. It's really powerful, and I hope that our listeners are some way or the other nudged to go out and see this and study this for themselves as well, and not just, of course, base it on one episode, but also learn more from you and from other experts in this field as well. So thank you so much for being here today. It was amazing having you, and this was like one of the most insightful episodes we've ever shot till date. So we are really grateful to have
Oh, well,
you.
thank you. Oh, you're
That's it
very
for
welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. That's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar, and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories your way. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast, like, share, and comment on our videos. And oh, hit the bell icon, because you don't want to miss the mind boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?